And now, as we are all apart, let us process in together by singing Enter, Rejoice, and Zoom in, or Enter, Rejoice, and Come in, as you prefer. Lori Douglas is our worship associate today. Lori, take it away.
Welcome. As you know, I'm your worship associate, and I will be doing our opening spot here. After our chalice lighting and the affirmation, you'll have time to light your own chalice, so you can wait till then to do that. And I will read our opening words. Today they are, opening words for the chalice. They are by Reverend Lisa Doji, a native Minnesotan. I bet she doesn't pronounce it that way. Who worked most of her life in Minnesota as a pastor and enjoys UU women's history and narrative theology. Why a flaming chalice, the question comes. It's the cup of life, we answer. A cup of blessings overflowing, a cup of water to quench our spirit's thirst. A cup of wine for celebration and dedication. The flame of truth, the fire of purification, oil for anointing and healing. Out of chaos, fear, and horror, thus was the symbol crafted a generation ago. So may it be for us in these days of uncertainty, sorrow, and rage. And it's a light to warm our souls and to guide us home. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. And now together we'll light this chalice, and then when we light this, you can light yours at home. Please join me in reciting the affirmation. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our aspiration, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth and love, and to help one another. And now we'll take a moment for you to light your chalice at home. And Lori has our opening words for us at this time.
Our opening words are from the Reverend Dr. Jack Mendelson, who was Minister Emeritus of the First Baptist Church of Bedford, Massachusetts. And he also served as minister of the Arlington Street Church in Boston. Here in this sanctuary of ancient dreams and wisdom, our sanctuary being our community as it is today, this sanctuary of ancient dreams and wisdom and beauty, we come to grow, to be healed, to stretch mind and heart, to be challenged, renewed, to be helped in our own continuing struggles for meaning and for love, to help build a world with more justice and mercy in it, to be counted among the hopers and the doers. In the face of cynicism and darkness, brutality around us and within, we seek to align ourselves with a living community that would affirm rather than despair, that would think and act rather than simply to adjust and succumb. Here we invite the spirit of our own humanity and the healing powers under, around, through, and beyond us to give us the nerve and grace, the toughness and sensitivity to search out the truth that frees and the life that maketh all things new. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. Our song that we're going to share this morning is the classic popular social justice song, We Shall Overcome. This song has been around as a social justice anthem for about 60 years, and it's been sung in many different contexts for many different reasons. This summer, it seems to be getting a lot of use because of all the different social justice activities and events and changes that are happening around the nation at this time. But also our topic for today, our actions of immediate witness that came out of General Assembly, is what I'll be talking about during the sermon. And so the song also fits perfectly with those social justice issues. So as we sing, "We Shall Overcome," you'll see the video and the lyrics on the screen. Thank you again to our choir for putting this together, and especially to Linda Himes for all the work she continues to put in to make these videos and PowerPoints work for us. Please sing along at home as we sing "We Shall Overcome."
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we'll walk hand in hand someday. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall all be free someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace
Fantastic. That was amazing. That's a new video that they just put together this past week, and I just absolutely love it. Thank you all so much. And as you know, our music director is Jim Boyle, and he's been working with the choir on putting together the songs. He also recorded the instrumental that we use. And we've spent the past several weeks spotlighting our different board members so you can get to know them. And now we're going to spend a couple of weeks spotlighting our staff. And so Jim is actually up today to share so that we can learn a little bit more about him and his background and why he calls us his spiritual home. So let's spotlight Jim. And Jim, please take a few moments and share.
Good morning. I'm Jim Boyle, the music director at UUFCC, and we're ready for a 3-minute travelogue through my life. It's a little bit daunting to try to summarize things that way. First of all, I was born in Lafayette, Georgia. I'm the middle of 5 sons, and you try to get your favorite piece of chicken with 5 other people there trying to grab at the same time. I grew up on a partially working farm. We had a garden. We often had chickens, a milk cow, and I think I began my love of plants and gardening in my childhood there. I went to a small church in Lafayette. It was a Church of God, which technically is not a denomination, it's a movement. And we had a very saintly pastor and his wife. whom I adored, and the church family there were extended family for me. I went to school at Rock Spring Elementary School. I loved school. I loved my teachers. We had stellar teachers. And I was very well prepared for high school and college. I began playing the piano when I was in the 5th grade. I had sat down at home and started to play a little bit by ear. So my parents decided it was time for me to have lessons. And about that time, I started to sing in the adult choir at my church. I continued on to Lafayette High School, and there I had more piano study. And I was playing the classics in their original scoring while I was in high school. I also played saxophone in the band. Then I went on to Anderson College in Anderson, Indiana, and there I studied music, thought I would change to biology, changed back to music, and I sang in the college choir and campus singers. Then I transferred to UTC Chattanooga and took a degree in music education, sang in the college choir, singing mocks, the chamber singers, and I also studied music composition there. Then later, I took a master's degree in voice at USF in Tampa and had concentration in choral conducting. I spent about 30 years in the Hillsborough County Schools in Tampa as a music specialist, and 9 of those years were very special because they were in special education. I taught emotionally disturbed and severely disturbed kids, pre-K through high school. While I was teaching school, I had many choirs and really enjoyed the choral music and the classroom. In Tampa, I sang in the Oratorio Society, the USF Community Choir, and the first year that the Master Chorale was formed in Tampa. Also in Tampa, I co-founded the Clifton Street Singers. They're a semi-professional singing group. And we took a tour of Holland in, I think, 1999. I love travel, so over the years, I've been to Russia, Spain, Italy, China, South America, Austria, Germany, Greece, and others. I love to go to other cultures and see how people operate in different settings. And I've served as organist, pianist, youth choir director, adult choir director, soloist, and so on in various churches: Baptist, Methodist, Disciples of Christ, Unity, Presbyterian, and finally UU. I was asked about directing the choir by Bob Taylor about 5 years ago. I used to come to the UU services, and I just enjoyed being there and not having any responsibility and singing at the top of my voice and just enjoying the music. And so Bob came to me and said, you needed a choir director and would I consider it? So that's how I got to the UU there. On my spiritual journey, of course, I began in the Christian tradition, but my journey is a little different from a lot of other people I talk with because my first experience was a lot more positive than some people say theirs was. So I got some of the fundamentals of spirituality there. But of course, as I got to be a teenager and a little bit older, I wanted to branch out a bit. So I did that even though I was serving in traditional churches. And then I came upon Unity, and I found that much broader and more positive. And then finally, I was attending UU in Chattanooga and ultimately in Fort Charlotte, and found that I really loved the idea of the 7 principles. And I love the idea that UU is so inclusive. I hope that this journey through part of my life has been interesting. And there's a whole lot more. Just ask me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jim. Yeah, it's been so great over the past couple of months to get to know so many of our members better and look forward to continuing this series until we get to know everybody a little bit more. So that's fantastic. At this time, we invite you to share anything that you have to share with the community in the chat room. And so you can find that down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're watching on a computer of some type, there's a little dialog box with the word chat. You can simply click on that and write there. If you have something positive or a concern about yourself, a family member, a friend, something that you'd like to share as far as maybe a birthday or an anniversary, now is the time to write that in the chat, to share that with us. And we'll give you a moment to do that and have a little musical interlude. So we'll share an instrumental at this time and give you a moment to write in the chat. At this time, we'll enter into a moment of silence, and this is a chance to take a minute and to think about the week that you've just had, to think about the events in your life, in your family, among your friends, and in our world, to clear your mind, to lift your concerns to the universe, to share with the energy of life what it is that's on your mind, and just to focus in this moment. So we'll have a minute of silence at this time, and then we'll have, I'll ding the bell, and then we will sing Spirit of Life together. So let's have a moment of silence at this time. thank you so much for all sharing in that. That's one of the most valued and revered songs that we have in Unitarian Universalism. At this time, I'll just remind you that we are accepting your donations and offerings and pledges, both by regular mail and also through the Venmo app, if you have that on your smartphone. Please continue to give. We do have our regular financial needs. That hasn't really changed since the pandemic, even though we're not meeting in person here on Sunday mornings. And thank you all for doing that so faithfully. Also, just a reminder that this is a second Sunday, which means second helping offering. And for the past 3 months, this is the third of the 3, we've been helping 3 community agencies who especially focus on feeding the needy, because this is such an important time. I don't remember if I've shared this or not, but our youngest daughter lives up in Cleveland, and she works for the Cleveland Area Food Bank. And so she keeps us posted on how that's been going, not only with her agency, but with many others. And while the need is a little bit less than it was back in April, it is still very high. A lot more people than usual have hunger issues and are at risk of going hungry, both adults and children. So as you send in your donations for the second helping, we will be sharing those among the 3 community agencies that focus on food and helping people who have a need at that time. So thank you for continuing to give. In our song Spirit of Life that we just sang, there's a line that says, we give love the shape of justice. And justice comes in many shapes and sizes and forms and colors. It doesn't look the same for everyone. Last week, you heard from several of our members who attended the virtual online General Assembly. General Assembly is the annual gathering of Unitarian Universalists from all over the world, of course, primarily from the United States. But it is the time during the year when thousands of people gather together to not only do the business of Unitarian Universalism, but also to talk about our direction, to learn from each other. We have a lot of great speakers. We have some wonderful worship services. We have workshops and seminars by the dozens on all kinds of topics that impact who we are as a movement and as a denomination. And so General Assembly this year was online only via Zoom and YouTube for the first time, of course. Now, for years, some people have been able to attend virtually and vote and participate in especially the large settings. And I know that here at UUFCC in the past, you've had occasion on the closing Sunday morning worship to watch that together. And so doing some of that online isn't necessarily new, but doing the whole thing online is brand new. I did watch the service from last week, and I appreciated the perspectives that our members shared. And it was interesting to see what the different takeaways were and how everybody emphasized some of their own unique experiences. I want to take today and next Sunday to talk about a couple of what I view to be the most important events that happened at General Assembly. Today, I'm going to talk about what we call the actions of immediate witness. And these are basically resolutions about current events that the entire membership says this is something we want to emphasize for the next year. And so it talks about actions that the denomination will take, which is headquartered in Boston. It talks about recommended actions that congregations and individuals can take. And so I want to talk about that today. And then next week, I'd like to talk about the report from the Commission on Institutional Change. For the past few years, there's been a group of people that have been studying our leadership, our administrative roles, our policies and procedures and bylaws, and everything that governs who we are as Unitarian Universalists to help make us aware of not only our own white supremacy culture, but our male dominance and some other issues that have become problematic and that are actually antithetical to who we say we are through our 7 principles. And there are some controversial parts to not only the actions of immediate witness, but also to the report from the Commission on Institutional Change. And I don't want to shy away from those. Most of you really have no idea what's happening at the denominational level, and that's okay, and that's to be expected. because we don't really talk about that a whole lot. And it's something that I want to address because I think that might have been a mistake on my part to not really talk very much about Unitarian Universalism and what's happening at the denominational level. We don't do this work alone. The Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Charlotte County, we do not live in a bubble and operate as if we're not part of something larger. We are. Our bylaws indicate that we are affiliated with the Unitarian Universalist Association, which is a lot of syllables to say, by the way. And we should take advantage of being a part of that movement, that the worldwide movement that spreads the message of liberal religion, of spiritual seeking, and of social justice in our communities and around the world. So what we do as part of the UUA is important. It should inform what we do, and we should be informing what happens with the denomination as well. The UUA has many resources and shared projects in which we participate, not just financially, but we have some of our members who participate in some of those commissions and activities, and of course, the General Assembly. We have a lot of gifted and inspiring people in the denomination from whom we can learn and from whom we do learn. As I mentioned, one of the most anticipated aspects of General Assembly each year is the discussion about the proposed actions of immediate witness. The way this process works is that individuals, congregations, groups of congregations can submit a proposal for an action of immediate witness. It explains a current event or some happening that's going on in the nation or in the world that should be addressed, in their view, by the denomination and by congregations associated with Unitarian Universalism in America and all around the world. Some years they might get 4 or 5 of these, some years they might get a couple of dozen. It depends on a lot of different factors. But these proposals have a very specific way that they're supposed to be written, and that creates some controversy because that has to do with white European leadership and our need to have things happen in a very certain specific way before they even get recognized. Many very valuable and valid actions of immediate witness proposals don't even get considered because they don't use the right format. And so this is part of the Commission on Institutional Change and their recommendations. So all of these things kind of weave together. This year, there were 2 actions of immediate witness that were approved and affirmed by the members, by the congregants who attended General Assembly. 2 is not a magic number. Some years there are 0 that are affirmed. Some years there could be 5 or 6. So there's not a certain number. This year there happened to be 2. And both of these were affirmed by the delegates with over a 95% vote. And so they have overwhelming support by the delegates and the denomination. The 2 actions of immediate witness, which are typically abbreviated AIW, the 2 actions were entitled this. The first one was called Addressing 400 Years of White Supremacist Colonialism. The second one was entitled Amen to Uprising, a Commitment and a Call to Action. First, I'll discuss the one entitled Addressing 400 Years of White Supremacist Colonialism. Here is the description of this proposal as it was approved. This AIW describes the reasons why Unitarian Universalists must remember and address the European invasion of this continent, the genocide of the original peoples, and the ongoing destruction of our earth. It offers priority actions which Unitarian Universalists can take in solidarity with indigenous-led movements and struggles. So it's not difficult to see the current events that this AIW was born from. And that has a lot of important implications for different things that are happening in the world today. For example, we know that the movement that brought Europeans to the Americas, to the New World, was their desire to conquer lands, to increase trade routes, to have newfound freedom, to find precious metals or precious materials that they could claim for their kings, for the royalties back in the lands that they came from. And of course, many came to America for religious reasons, for religious freedom, to escape religious persecution. all of this action were actions of colonialism, of expansion. And that resulted in the Europeans bringing to the indigenous peoples who lived in this area at the time diseases and animals and crops and all kinds of issues that did not blend well with the culture. The American Indians, the indigenous peoples, were not able to fight off a lot of the diseases that the Europeans brought, but also the very violent nature of the Europeans coming here to conquer the lands created very nearly a total genocide of the indigenous peoples, and some tribes were indeed totally wiped out. Colonialism from many countries resulted in the near physical and cultural genocide of tribes and of many different indigenous peoples. The Europeans came pillaging and depleting natural resources from fossil fuels and forests to buffalo and other species. And that was a result of unbridled greed and ignorance on a part of those colonialists who came to conquer the land and claim it for their king. There was no consideration given to the idea that the people who lived here owned this land. This was their native soil. And those coming from Europe didn't care. As long as they could conquer them militarily, then the victory goes to the strongest. That's just how it was at the time. We look back now and we see the terrible results of that type of colonialism, the terrible results of the people coming from Europe to conquer the Americas. And we see how this continues to have a result in our world today here in the United States. We know that for hundreds of years, the treaties that were agreed to by the US government and different tribes were totally ignored. The lands that were promised to Native Americans have been run over and taken over. This past week, when we had the 4th of July weekend and there was a celebration at Mount Rushmore where President Trump had a big rally, there was a lot of controversy and a lot of demonstration there. People talking about, well, maybe we should blow up Mount Rushmore. And there was a lot of misunderstanding about that. The idea isn't to say that Washington and Lincoln and Jefferson and Roosevelt were bad people and we should destroy their memories. But that part of the Dakotas that was claimed by the United States was originally Lakota Indian land. And it was part of a treaty that was signed by the United States guaranteeing forever the Lakotans' right to own that portion of the Dakotas, including the Black Hills. Well, after the Civil War, the United States was in a terrible, terrible depression. Ulysses S. Grant was president at the time, and some prospector discovered that there were gold mines in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And President Grant, General Sherman, who was general of the armies at the time, they came up with a plan to basically chase the Indians off of that land. And that involved paying hunters to come and kill buffalo, the very thing that the Native Americans needed for their food and their clothes and their very sustenance. And they almost totally wiped out all the buffalo on the plains in just a couple of years by giving people a price per head of what they would kill. This is how the person Buffalo Bill Cody became famous. He got his nickname because he supposedly killed over 4,000 buffalo himself in just a couple of years. Because of that, the Native Americans, the Lakota that were living in that area, got starved out of that land. Crazy Horse was a Native American leader at that time in that area, and he decided that with some people they would stay and try to hold on to that land. But eventually General Custer came. We know what happened with that. He was killed. There was a great battle. When Custer was killed, it brought the American army in greater numbers, and eventually the Lakota were forced off the land. The United States claimed Black Hills, the gold saved the economy, and now we have Mount Rushmore. This is just one of many, many, many stories we could tell about how the American government basically ignored or tore up the treaties with different Native American tribes, how they pillaged the lands and killed the resources, trying to force the Native Americans to move on and find a way to invalidate the treaties that were given in good faith originally by the Native Americans. Some of the actions that were recommended through this action of immediate witness, many of which we can participate right here, includes the following. Continue to gather in solidarity with the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, Standing Rock Nation, and all indigenous people struggling to preserve their lands, waters, peoples, sacred sites, and sovereignty. Part of what we know about the Black Hills area of South Dakota is that it was considered basically the point of creation of the universe by the Lakota and the tribes that lived in that area. And the fact that America came in and took it over and desecrated it by creating this gigantic monument at Mount Rushmore is one of the worst acts that anybody could have done to them. It killed their culture in so many different ways. But to continue to gather and to speak out and to demonstrate along with the Native American tribes to try to reclaim some of that for themselves is one of the actions. Next, to continue the push for release of indigenous water protectors from prisons into public policies that criminalize resistance to extractive colonialism and adopt a vision of prison abolition. Those Native Americans and allies who are trying to take a stand against the government and private industry to try to preserve their waterways, to try to prevent oil pipelines from going through their lands. Many of them wind up arrested and in jail for a very long time, simply for trying to protect and preserve the lands that were promised to them hundreds of years ago. Another action is to work nationally, statewide, and locally on public policy that is decolonizing, such as establishing an Indigenous Peoples Day. Many people suggest doing that instead of Columbus Day. Including Indigenous peoples' histories and public education curricula, eliminating racist monuments, flags, and mascots. There's been a lot of discussion recently about nicknames of different schools or professional teams, such as the Washington Redskins, the Florida State Seminoles, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and on and on and on. And the reason for that is not necessarily that we want to get rid of the memory of Native American related names, but that they've been abused. The Cleveland Indians used to have Chief Wahoo, who was a cartoonized version of an American Indian. Most teams have stopped doing that to that degree, but whenever you hear the tomahawk chop in a stadium, or you have other cries or cheers that goes up by the fans, that is insulting to Native Americans. And so that's why that's part of the action from this particular AIW. We need to continue to work to stop and reverse ecological harm in genuine collaboration with and taking leadership from communities most consistently and harshly impacted by extractive exploitation of the land, water, air, and all beings. Next point, research, identify, and acknowledge the indigenous peoples historically and or currently connected with the land occupied by congregations. Find ways to act in solidarity with or even partner with those indigenous peoples groups. Maybe we should do some research to find out which indigenous peoples occupied this land on which UUFCC sits today and find ways to maybe repair that relationship. That is some worthwhile research to do. And examine practices relative to indigenous peoples, particularly the narratives regarding UU origins and US holidays, including Thanksgiving, which is problematic in many ways. Coming up in the next several weeks in August and September, I am going to do a series to talk about some of those UU origins and how it was problematic, the way that many Unitarians and Universalists partnered with the colonialist Europeans and created some of these problems hundreds of years ago. So that's the summary of the first action of immediate witness. The second AIW is titled Amen to Uprising, a commitment and a call to action. And here's the description of this. This AIW is a call to action for Unitarian Universalists to engage in the larger movement to end anti-Blackness and defund the police. I know that term, defund the police, is problematic, but we're going to talk about that in a couple minutes. The current global political movement is presenting us with unique and urgent possibilities. With specific attention to our universalist theology, we imagine the possibility of a world free from policing. This AIW affirms our renewed commitment to creating authentic justice rather than relying on state violence. So a couple of issues with the description of this AIW. This was passed with a little bit of discussion, but not a lot. And as I said, it was passed with over 95% affirmation on the part of the delegates. And I know that on the news or in different media outlets, you hear about people talking about defunding the police in different ways. Some people say we don't really mean to get rid of the police. We mean to reduce the funding for the militarized police and encourage them to work to their strengths. We've created a police force in almost every community during this time where the police have to do so many things for which they're not trained. They have to be social workers sometimes when they find somebody on the streets or when they're called into domestic violence situations, or whenever they're called with a disturbance of somebody who might have some mental or emotional challenges. Police are not equipped to be social workers. That's not their role. And often whenever you hear about these terrible police killings, it's because they come in as police officers with guns rather than as social workers looking for solutions and a way to help. And so that's part of what that means. But there are also many people who literally mean totally defund and eliminate the police, and let's find a different system of social justice, of criminal justice, and of keeping our streets and our communities safe, because the current system is broken and doesn't work. We could talk about the history of policing in America and how what's happening today is a result of what happened after the Civil War, where tens of thousands of Confederate soldiers were the losers and had nowhere else to go, and many of them fled to South America, but also many of them went to the West, which became the Wild West. And the policing at the time led to a lot of capturing of freed slaves, treating freed slaves harshly, which of course has come down from 130 years of history from that point. There's a lot of troubling histories about policing in America. So there are many people who are saying we need to get rid of that system and start over with something brand new that actually works and helps community, instead of a policing system that targets minorities, that does racial profiling in many ways, and is bringing harm to communities. So some of the specific actions that this AIW recommends for the denomination and for congregations include these: creating a system of change within our congregations by revising agreements and policies to create alternatives to policing, by choosing not to involve police departments and deactivating security systems that mobilize police response when triggered. So what are our plans here at UUFCC? If we happen to be gathered for a meeting or on a Sunday morning and there's a disturbance, somebody comes in, or we have a disturbance here and somebody creates a problem, is our first reaction to call 911 and ask for the police to come? Or do we have an alternatively safer way to respond to those situations? That's what this is asking us to do. Also, engaging in creative, transformative justice processes. As I said, police are not social workers. How can we transform the militaristic police state into something that actually helps more people? Pursuing abolition of policing systems which within congregations and institutions in which we have power. What can we do to impact Charlotte County? I know that the narrative is that Charlotte County is very conservative. We see that in the voting record, but Charlotte County is changing drastically. We're going to see that in November with the voting outcomes. This is one of the fastest growing areas of Florida, with people who are much more liberal and progressive in their thinking. And so this can have an impact. Also, it says, therefore, we will support uprisings with spiritual and material resources, serving as places of respite during protest, funding movements through congregational budgets, and providing spiritual care for protesters and survivors of police and state terror. Again, what does that mean for us? Who could we be partnering with in Charlotte County to help support victims of police violence? And I don't mean necessarily what we see on the news when someone is killed simply by being accused of passing a phony $20 bill, but what are the other ways that people in Charlotte County are being victimized by the police? The homeless are targeted, especially those who are on bicycles, because there seems to be some correlation between thefts and people on bicycles. That's direct from the words of the sheriff of Charlotte County. What are some other ways that people are being targeted in our area where we might be able to step in and provide some help to both the victims and to try to bring some change in the policing in our county? Therefore, we will advocate in the wider world by following the example of institutions like the Minneapolis Public School Board in ending contracts with police. How could we encourage our local school board to rethink their work with school resource officers, as they're called? School violence and arrest of students has increased drastically across the nation, with school resource officers being in the building. Because when you're trained as a police officer and you see a problem in a school, you consider yourself a hammer and every problem looks like a nail. Again, police officers are not trained broadly to handle all of the various difficulties that come up in our society, and absolutely not in schools. I am tired of seeing 8-year-olds put in handcuffs and walked away from an elementary school because they got upset in the classroom and some teacher got scared. That has got to end. And therefore, we commit to making our congregations and communities authentically multicultural, multiracial, anti-oppressive spaces to dismantle anti-Blackness, resisting a culture of perfectionism. Yes, perfectionism is a problem, expecting everyone else to handle everything perfectly while giving yourself an out for not being perfect. And repairing our mistakes, and we have made many, which we are trying to work on, and we have to recognize them first before we can change them. Given that building the beloved community is an ongoing and ever-evolving process, we commit to staying in this work for the long haul. Again, how do we examine that? Currently, we have some working groups that are looking at our bylaws and potential revisions that need to be made, our policy and procedure manuals and revisions that need to be made there. And as part of that work, we're looking at some of the discriminatory language or ideas or white supremacy or other types of power language that's used there that may be holding down or oppressing minority voices or dissenting voices. So we're taking a look at that. It's super easy for us as Unitarian Universalists to want to keep the peace, to say we just want to get along so that we can go along and not and try to avoid conflict. Sometimes whenever we're trying to bring change, we cannot avoid conflict. Conflict is just part of the deal to affect meaningful change. These actions of immediate witness create some significant challenges for us in this culture in Charlotte County. I recognize that. Hopefully this will continue to move the conversation forward though. A couple of ways in the next few days you can get involved or continue the conversation. Today at noon, we have our monthly Social Justice Committee meeting. You don't have to be assigned to a committee. In Unitarian Universalist congregations, everyone is a member of the Social Justice Committee. Probably didn't know that. So everyone is welcome to reconvene at noon using this very same link and participate in the discussion and see what our Social Justice Committee is doing. Next week, as I said, we'll be discussing the Commission on Institutional Change report and some of the major findings and recommendations that comes from that commission. And then Monday, July 20th, I think that's the right date, yes. The Monday after next Sunday, I'm gonna do an open discussion town hall where we can get together anybody interested and we can talk about these issues, the actions of immediate witness, the report from the Commission on Institutional Change, some of the other work that we're doing, and talk about that from a pastoral perspective. So we invite you to be a part of that. Look for a link and an email and more information on that in the next few days. The work called for by the actions of immediate witness seems difficult, it seems messy, and it seems extreme to many, but they are what our denomination voted to support, and UUFCC is part of the UUA. So we have to find our way to support this as well. This work has different implications for us than it does for congregations, say in Boston or Atlanta or Chicago, but we are called to discuss and act on these issues nonetheless. My role as your minister requires me to lead in these areas, but not to do the work alone. Not to do the work alone. I trust that you will choose to learn more, to continue the conversation, and to do what you can to correct the wrongs that the indigenous people and people of color have lived with for hundreds of years in our America. Amen and blessed be. Lori has our closing words.
Our closing words today are from Reverend Maureen Killoran. Born in Canada, Reverend Killoran has over the past 30 years served in UU congregations all throughout the United States and Canada, including Florida. We are called today from the midst of pain and challenge. We're called to praise the world. From a world that appears broken, we are called to praise life's moments of joy and grace. From time that seems to freeze in ongoing exchanges of platitudes and blame, we're called to reach out to those around us, to connect with those we care about, to try to make amends with those for whom we are estranged. The world is too fragile. There is too much pain. Let us bring our hearts together on this day. Let us praise the mutilated world in all its blessing and its pain. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. As we close, we extinguish the chalice, but not the light of hope, the fire of commitment, or the warmth of community. May those ideals shine in our lives and warm our hearts until we can be truly together again. I'd like to take just a few minutes and share some items for the life of the community. We do have some other activities or information that I would like to make you aware of. Again, we do have the Social Justice Committee meeting coming up in about 35 minutes. If you don't stick around for the social hour, you can use the same link and that will take you back into that meeting at noon. Or you can just stay here and chat or listen into the conversation for the next half hour or so and then just continue on at noon with the Social Justice Committee meeting. I do think we still have a couple of worm bins here that are looking for foster parents. So if you have some capacity at your place to have a nice shaded area for worm bins that you can just look at and water from time to time and feed them some of your slop of whatever food you might not eat, that would be fantastic. You can shoot me an email and I'll connect you with the right people to do that. A couple other things that I want to make you aware of. We've been working on a new, more formal phone tree. Back in March and April, we had several people volunteer to make phone calls just to see how everybody in the congregation was doing with the shutdown and staying at home. And we want to continue to do that, but we've come up with a more formal phone tree. Sometime this week, please expect a phone call from somebody asking how you're doing. Some of you are volunteer callers, which will be fantastic. And if you really don't feel like you want a phone call, or if there are other people that may need phone calls that are somehow associated with the congregation, please let us know when you hear from somebody checking on you. We're not trying to look in on you, or we're not trying to badger you. We just genuinely want to know how you're doing, so please expect that. Also, Zoom has made some changes that we're not totally sure when they're going to take effect. The initial report said it would take effect this coming week, which would impact our service next Sunday. I just read something last night that said they're postponing that to September. But the security changes that Zoom is making means that we'll either need a special password for every meeting, including the Sunday morning meetings, for people to get in, or we need to create what's called a waiting room. So sometime this week or maybe next Sunday, you might see this in a little bit of a different format. You may have to click a link and then we have to let you in or something. Look for an email with information about that. What that does, though, is that it gives us a chance to share our information more widely about our worship services. So we may be sharing our links on Facebook or on our webpage or through other social media outlets, because I know there are others in the community that continue to be curious about who we are and what we do. And this would be a great time to connect with some of those folks who may feel isolated at home and looking for some type of online connection. That was a lot. Thanks for still being here. As always, I'll just remind you to be a blessing to everyone you come in contact with. Be a blessing by wearing a mask whenever you're out in public. Be a blessing by giving people a second chance who might be cranky or angry or mean whenever you're at the store or at a restaurant or whatever it might be. Be a blessing to those you live with, because this time is stressful on all of us. Most importantly, be a blessing to yourself during this time. Give yourself a chance to relax, to breathe, and to accept the reality with which we are living. And now, as we leave the time of worship, let's sing together, Go Now in Peace.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the Spirit of God surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the Spirit of love surround you
Thank you again for being here. Please do remember to be a blessing to everyone you meet. And now hang around for some chat during social hour, and then at 12 o'clock, please stay around or come back for our Social Justice Committee meeting. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dan, for a really good description of those AIWs, and I look forward to seeing what we're going to do with them.
Who was that?
That was Ginger.
Now, again, what does AIW stand for?
Action of Immediate Witness.
I unmuted us. He didn't know I unmuted us.
Thanks, Ginger.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Paul.
Good morning.
This is Ron, and I want to invite all of you to join us next week at 9 a.m. for the Conversation with Friends. Last week, we did poetry, our favorite poems. Today, we did our favorite songs, which reflected on poetry in music. And next week, I'll host our favorite movies, videos. What has changed our lives or influenced us that we want to share. It's not that easy to show a video, but sometimes if you have an iPad, you can put on the video, Netflix or whatever, you can put on a portion of it on your TV, pause it, and when it's your turn, you could turn your camera on the TV, which I did this morning on one of my little favorite songs, which was Shana Knoll singing, "How Can Anyone Ever Tell You You're Less Than Beautiful?" So please join us next week at 9 o'clock and swell our sharing. It'd be wonderful to. A couple of movies I recommended was Jesus Christ Superstar, because that combines everything, religion, poetry, song, and the movies, and was a big influence in my life.
Jesus Christ Superstar.
And the second one.
You didn't say.
And then La La Land is perhaps the latest operatic rock opera. And that's another one I recommend. Thank you.
This is Ginger. Ron, that song you mentioned is in our teal hymnal.
Oh, Shana Knoll.
Mm-hmm.
It's just magnificent. It was in the intensive care unit of my first son's premature birth in his incubator for a month on tape. And I'm sure it had some influence.
Something we have in common. I had a son who was in the ICU prematurely for 6 weeks, so I get it.
Yeah. Yep.
Lori, who is jumping around behind you?
That's my 5-year-old grandson.
Hi.
Say hi. Now he's shy. He's been called out.
Nice to see that energy jumping around. Really nice. What's his name?
See you now. It's Harrison. One of 12 grandchildren.
Oh my God.
13 coming, lucky 13 in September.
You got me beat.
This is Dennis.
A cutie.
Yeah, he is.
Hi, Dennis.
Hey, Dennis.
Hi, Dennis.
Hi, Dennis.
Hi. I guess I should have written this in the Book of Life this morning, but I just didn't get it together. I got a call yesterday from the Life Care Center in Punta Gorda, and 3 of the direct service folks that are working on the 2nd floor have the virus. And everybody, including of course Sonia, is in isolation now.
Oh boy.
And, everybody will be tested twice a week, but they don't expect results back for at least on this first testing for 5 days.
Wow.
But they said that, you know, at this point, she's totally asymptomatic. So they're just trying to keep it from, you know, I just can't imagine what a challenge that must be.
Well, we just
Imagine what's going to happen in a few weeks when teachers go back on August 3rd and students go back August 10th. I can't. It's
Can't imagine.
mind blowing with our numbers going up,
Yeah,
how
it's
they're going to
nuts.
manage
Her
that.
family has already experienced what is possibly going to happen. I picked up my 14-year-old granddaughter from basketball practice on Thursday. Friday morning, her dad called me and said that she wasn't feeling well. She had a headache and stuffy nose. And so